no authority to do anything about it. So now let's take it to the next logical step, that it is a school that promotes diversity and inclusion. You can't do anything about it. You can't do anything about the sex education curriculum. You can't do anything about the diversity and equity policies of that school. And they give all the scholarships but one to that school. There are no guardrails, is the point. There are no guardrails. For those of you that support this bill, there are actually no guardrails to achieve what you want to achieve. None. So I would recommend people start setting up your own 501c3s.
1 minute.
You get 10% as operating costs. So if you get the full $5 million, the Judas Club can get $500,000 annually for their operating costs to give to a school that teaches all the dreaded boogeyman terms. That's what you're doing. And I don't think you realize it, because if you realized it, you probably wouldn't be doing this, because you're taking a real gamble that kids are going to have comprehensive sex education with this bill. And I know there are many of you in here that fear that more than anything. Also, the State Board of Education is involved in this.
That's
So,
Senator.
thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator John Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. So again, I rise in support of AM 1145. And I actually, after the last time I was talking about I've been talking all day about verifiable metrics and things. So I dropped an amendment that should be up there that would require anyone who participates to participate in a statewide assessment and reporting system as described in section 79706. Basically holding anybody who participates in this program to the same standard we hold the public schools to in the state of Nebraska. But I did also want to comment, Senator Linehan, I appreciated sharing this data in this report, and I was looking at it when she was speaking and looked at it since then. And I, as I've said, am interested in reportable, verifiable metrics and data. And this is some impressive growth in numbers. And again, I would just say, after I dropped my amendment, only identifiable the success in this particular, these are the public schools of DC, mind you, but the success that the DC public schools have demonstrated over that period of time, which is from 2009 to 2019, growth is, we can see it as a result of the fact that they're subjecting to, in this case, the NEAP TUDA reading scale score trends. So I think it's important to reiterate that if we're actually going towards trying to find a way to help improve outcomes for kids, that we should, be dispassionate about it, look at the data, make sure that first off, make sure we're recording data, and then look at it and evaluate it in a way that is dispassionate, disconnected from our desires for what the outcome is. And I talked about earlier that I think there are a lot of different reports that have different conflicting. They look at the same numbers and they see the data in a different way. They can twist it or manipulate data by ignoring certain data sets, referring to some as noise or things like that, to ignore them. But you can only even get to that point where people have conflicting assessments of the data if you have data. And so we need to, I think, start there in terms of collecting the data. So that's what my amendment is asking, that we make sure that everybody is on the same footing for collection of that data. But again, I think I'm not hearing any opposition from anybody that's something we should be doing. So I would hope that as we move on in this discussion, maybe I can stop talking about it. We can just accept the fact that we should be subjecting participants in this to data collection, and I guess I can talk about other things that I'm not hearing other people talk about. Well, I'm hearing a lot of people talking about discrimination, and I guess I don't want to let my opportunity on the mic go without again reiterating my agreement that if we're going to be giving money to private entities, that we should ask that they not discriminate when they do that. But I think that it's important that we all have a shared, I'm sorry, 1 minute? Thank you. That we have a shared perspective on what it means and what our objectives are in the end. I've heard a lot of people talking. I guess I'm almost out of time, but so I'll push my button again. Talk if I really appreciated Senator Doran's questions. That raised some questions for me. Things, I guess, my interpretation of the bill that I thought about in just the mechanisms of how it works. And so I'll push my button. I'll get back on when my opportunity comes, and if I still have those questions at that point, I can articulate them then. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Matt Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon again, colleagues. The last time I spoke about IEPs in private schools, and what I said was accurate. Private schools aren't required to do IEPs. They aren't, and many choose not to. Many do choose to, but the thing is, there's not a categorical carte blanche that they have to serve those students in that capacity. That we, but to the same standard or any standard that we hold our public schools to. Since I've given that speech, I've heard from a couple people who've shared stories about shifting students away from private schools back to public schools just because the private schools' bad reaction and bad handling of their student's IEP, of the child's IEP, was so severe that any benefit private schools had for them was washed away. And the reason I bring that up is to share, is I know that's just an anecdote. There's lots of anecdotes that we share in here. But we had an opportunity earlier today to put in an anti-discrimination measure that would have, among other things, included both disability and special education status. And that got voted down. That got voted down, I presume, because of the inclusion of sexual orientation and gender identity. I have to presume that because I don't presume it's race or religion or national origin. So I've introduced an amendment that will include the discrimination against disability and special education status again. I might want to workshop it and try another one to make it clear that I'm trying to include IEPs, that it's not just you have to let the student into the school, you actually have to serve them at the same level that we expect our public schools to serve those students. But that's something that's going to stand by. I have to stand by. I have to say that if we are making it a state policy to funnel money to these schools, they at minimum have to serve all students at the same level that public schools do. I know somebody's going to jump up and say this particular private school does great. Very happy and very excited to hear that. Not all of them do, because they're not required to, and some are quite open about it. I bring all of this up because this is kind of my perpetual frustration with, again, this bill. We are talking about it being this great boon to certain individuals, and it might be, but it's as part of an overall restriction and limitation on public education. And I know, again, not in the four corners of that bill, but we are dealing with bills this year. I just saw one got a headline on the Journal Star that are going to restrict the spending authority of Lincoln Public Schools. You could see my hesitation when we're going to start a program that everybody acknowledges is going to balloon if it ever gets in statute. That's my fear, and I would presume the goal. We're going to introduce that at the same time. We're going to stop Lincoln Public Schools from growing their budget, and growing their budget one at a time when they are perpetually growing and growing and growing in student enrollment. I have to deal with both of these bills. I can't at the same time. I can't choose both of these bills one at a time because they're both going to impact the same children in Lincoln. They're both going to impact them. And I have to look at all of our school funding, taxes, property taxes holistically. We have some problems we have to fix. I understand that. I have been on board with many attempts to do many different things. Thank you, Mr. President. What I'm not going to do is continue to weaken Lincoln Public Schools, continue to weaken public schools, especially in favor of schools that do not have to provide IEPs. And the last thing I just want to put unequivocally in the record, special education, and I use that term to talk about students who need individualized programming. It is not a measure of their intelligence. I don't think they're stupid. I don't think anybody should refer to them as stupid. And the fact that that's something that people know simmer under the surface is its own problem, but discriminating against people with mental health, learning disabilities, and other issues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I've been listening to this debate for the last day and a half, and we seem to be talking in circles. There are two senators, though, that have spoken out, and they have spoken out because of their community, and that is Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney. And I appreciate that. They're standing up for their communities. So I decided to look up a couple of things, and I ran across a Habitat for Humanity website that gives 10 benefits for showing why education is so important to our society. Why? Because they want to change their society increment by increment, starting with their kids, because that is their only hope to changing their society there. The first point was creating more employment opportunities for our youth. For someone who may not have a chance, but because they get a chance at a better education, they can create better opportunities for themselves. They can also secure a higher income with a better education. Isn't that what we all want? Isn't that what we have been claiming for the last, well, since I've been here? Do we want a higher income for people? We can do that with education. Developing problem-solving skills. You know, if you're struggling in school and you can't quite get it, but there might be a better choice for you in a different school. Better education helps develop problem-solving skills. And that's what higher education does. It develops your skills from when you were in high school. Number 4 was improving the economy. If you have more people that are graduating from high school, more people going on to higher education, more people getting a solid job, you're improving your economy. Isn't that what LB 364 is trying to do? Number 5, bullet point 5, is providing a prosperous and happy life. If you are bettering your employment opportunities, if you have a higher income, if you have better problem-solving skills, you're going to have a happier life. You give back to the community once you've reached a status. You are no longer taking from a community, but you're giving back. And isn't that what we want for our children? Is to become better people, to give back to their communities, to work in their communities, to make their community better. That's what LB 364 does. Number 7, creating a modern society. How do you change society? Through education, through better education. And I think that's what Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney are talking about, is changing their community for the better. Number 8, bridging the borders. Through education, you can bridge the borders. You can move worlds. You can move thoughts. You can talk to people.
1 minute.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Number 9, creating equal opportunities through education. It doesn't matter your skin tone, your sex, or anything else, but through education, you can create equal opportunities. And number 10, introducing empowerment. Education is the key to turning weakness into strength. And I do believe that's what LB 364 is trying to do. And those that are not for it are not for improving our youth. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Senator McAllister.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I agree with every single word that Senator Lowe mentioned. Education is the key to one's success. You can boost yourself out of poverty and move into the middle class, and that's an objective that all people, I think, should want. But there's some questions with regard to this particular bill that we should ask. If a C corporation were to donate to an SGO, they could get a credit of 100% of their donation to the SGO, up to half of their tax liability. What kind of deal is that? Yeah, if you want to donate to your church or a food bank or anything else, you make a deduction, not a credit. So there's a fundamental error, a fundamental unfairness, I think, in these tax credit programs. Are there limits to how much a single individual or business can donate? No, up to the entire value of the credit, assuming enough tax liability, 50% of the tax liability. Currently, if an individual or business donates $1 million to a private scholarship granting organization, they would get a $78,000 tax benefit if they pay at the top rate. Under LB 364, if the business has at least $2 million in tax liability, they would get a credit of $1 million, the difference of $990,000. That's a lot of money, that's a lot of money. If they donate to a church or a cancer research, they still get the $78,100 tax deduction, a tax deduction, not a tax credit. Why do donations to private school scholarships more valuable than donations to cancer research? No answer to that. Food pantries to churches makes absolutely no sense. I'm not sure this will save the state much money, but there are other types of donations that could lead to saving the state money, such as donations to Charles Drew or One World. If those donations lead to providing prenatal care or other services to someone on Medicaid, then who has the lower Medicaid costs? But those donations don't get a 100% credit. One person could donate $5 million and still receive 50% of that amount as a tax credit. Credit. This is fundamentally unfair. We need to maintain the deduction approach rather than simply giving tax credits to someone who's got sufficient money to make a change. So fundamentally unfair, and I would hope you would defeat LB 364.
Thank you, Senator McAllister. Senator Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Respectfully to Senator Lowe and others on the floor, I'm standing up for my community too. When I was a child and I had a girlfriend and I had crushes on girls, there were not people in the state legislature standing up for me like that. And do you know the rates of depression and suicide among LGBTQ youth? And for us to tell them, yeah, we know all that, but we're going to incentivize wealthy people in Nebraska to make it easier for schools that discriminate against you to make money, like that makes no sense. That should be a deal breaker for every single person on this floor who cares about equity, who cares about the future of youth. You don't need to have a personal connection to this issue to know that this is wrong. It's also really not about trusting parents. The legislators who are supporting LB 364 aren't trusting parents. I trust parents to decide what school to send their kids to. I totally support their right to do that. I support expanding and strengthening the support that we're giving to public schools while working in our communities to mitigate the circumstances that cause other hardships for kids all over the state. So fundamental family rights and the rights of parents, that's really not what this is about. Think about comprehensive sex education. The people who support LB 364, many of them, are the same people who are opposing comprehensive sex education in our public schools in Nebraska. So they don't trust those parents. In this issue of the Archdiocese of Omaha Catholic Voice, which is a newspaper from the Archdiocese of Omaha, they talk about LB 364 and the health education, comprehensive sex education standards. They say Nebraskans are pushing back against proposed health standards for state public schools. Many see the standards, which would teach acceptance of multiple gender identities and homosexuality, as part of a radical political agenda. They also see the standards as one more reason to help provide families other education options for their children. LB 364, this bill, a bill which would provide scholarship opportunities to students from low-income families to attend private schools, would be one way to help, according to the Nebraska Catholic Conference. If a school district adopts the controversial standards, it would put many families at a nexus and have them asking, what are my options? Said Jeremy Eckler, Associate Director of Education Policy for the NCC. Families could transfer their children to private schools, but not all children can afford that option. That's why LB 364 is important, Eckler said. So the Archdiocese, the Catholic Archdiocese, is telling parents in their flock, in their congregation, that they should support LB 364 to keep their children from knowing about gay people, to keep their kids from having to learn anything about healthy relationships, personal health, sexual health, any of that stuff. Support LB 364 to protect your good Christian children from gay kids. That's what the Catholic Church is saying out loud. And that's what all of you said out loud when you voted down my amendment to include a non-discrimination clause. You want this. Maybe it's not the first thing you want. Maybe the first thing you want.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Maybe the first thing you want is to see more kids go to private school. I don't agree with that goal either. But also, I would tell you, if you think that, what makes you think, in East Omaha, for example, what makes you think that all of the scholarship funds are going to go to those schools? If this bill helps, 400 kids in Nebraska, what makes you think that all those kids are going to be from your district or from any certain part of the state at all? The tax credit could go to 2 donors, and all of the scholarship credits, up to $5 million, could go to 2 schools. There's no reporting mechanism, there's no data collection, there's no way in the bill to ensure that the funds are distributed equitably, or even that they're distributed to any certain part of Nebraska. There are so many solutions that we need to explore before we land here.
That's time.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Mosher.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I think in our discussion, we've lost focus on who we're trying to help. We've spent some time talking about the worthiness of the people who get tax credits. And the tax credit doesn't go to the person who gave the money. All they're getting out of it is they get the satisfaction of knowing that some of the tax that they're paying to the state is going to private education. They can't dictate which school it goes to. They can't dictate which student might get scholarship aid. If they had a $10,000 tax liability, they could get a $5,000 credit that would go into this education fund, but it doesn't benefit them. There are a lot of things they could do with their money that would benefit them. They could buy tax-free bonds. There are a lot of ways that they could get a benefit. And if you're lower income, you can't donate directly to a school or a church and get any credit anyway, because I think that the threshold is around 24,000 before you can claim a deduction. Otherwise, the standard deduction is larger. So the worthiness of the donor, I don't think, is relevant to the discussion. They're putting money into the system to help kids who want to go to private schools. When Senators Dorn and Linehan were talking about how much each scholarship might be, they were talking around $7,500. Even if you put it in at $5,000 and divide that into 5 million, you could help 1,000 students. So I think we should focus on the 1,000 students we can help rather than whether our donor has the right pedigree to satisfy us as to whether they're worthy to donate to this fund. They get no direct benefit from it at all. Their tax deduction goes to this charity. The only thing they get out of it is the satisfaction of knowing that it went to a nonprofit to help educate kids in a private school system. Whatever time I have left, I would donate to Senator Wayne.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Senator Wayne, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Colleagues, I was previewing this rest of this week of bills coming up, and it caught my attention that I went back and looked at some votes that we have a DNA bill coming up. And many people on my side of the aisle actually voted for it. So I just want to tell people briefly what that means. Upon arrest, the police can take your DNA. The state can't actually run your DNA until after a probable cause hearing. But even if which is a preliminary hearing, even if you're found not guilty, or you plead down to a misdemeanor, the feds actually get to keep your DNA. And you have to hire an attorney to contact the state patrol and the feds, but the state patrol to get rid of your DNA. So we have a problem on my side of the aisle that we can't give Black and brown kids and poor kids scholarships.
1 minute.
But we don't have a problem, and I hope the people are watching, we don't have a problem as Dems to make sure that police can't round up your DNA. And we know prosecutors overcharge Black and brown people. We know police are arrested at a higher rate. But then they're going to turn around and some of them are going to vote against the prison, but not vote against the DNA bill and how you got to the prison. This is politics at its best. Politics at its best. Vote for the collection of DNA, knowing about all the discrimination in our justice system, but we don't like how it's set up. We don't want to give wealthy people a tax break to give poor people a chance to a better school. Interesting. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Wayne. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I'm just researching how to start a 501c3 so that I can become a granting scholarship organization, since it seems to be not that hard. There seems to be no requirements. I rethought the name though, not Judas, but maybe the Mary Magdalene Foundation for Girls. Give scholarships to young women and femme-aligned individuals so that they can go to a school that teaches comprehensive sex education. It's not about who the donors are for me. It's about how this all works. It's all the mechanisms, it's all the moving pieces. And it's honestly, this bill, even if I were supporting it philosophically, doesn't have any guardrails. It really is very open, and it's not clear who makes these decisions. Who decides who qualifies as a granting organization? There's a list of what it means to qualify, but there's no who makes that decision. Is it the treasurer? Is it the governor? Is it us? Is it the State Board of Education? Is it the director of the state board? Or the Department of Education? It is not stated. It is an unknown. So that right there gives one pause. It gives me pause, at least. I would hope that it would give everyone else pause. Now, yes, that is a fixable problem, but what if it's not fixed the way that you want it? What if it goes to the State Board of Education that some people are trying to get rid of? Will you still support this bill? If the State Board of Education gets to decide who gets to qualify as a granting organization, will you still support this bill? You should really ask yourselves that question, because if this bill were to move forward, you better believe that amendment would be coming. Because we're talking about $5 million, and $5 million isn't a lot to our state budget, but $5 million is a lot to individuals. And it's enough to cause concerns over corruption and misuse. We are talking about children. We're talking about really, really important children, because every single child is important. And there is nothing that says that a private education is better than a public education. Nothing at all. It's just a different education. It's just a different approach. Just like if you go to a different school, it's a different approach. It's going to have good things. It's going to have bad things. It's going to have good outcomes. It's going to have bad outcomes. But at the end of the day, it's still education. And the children that we're trying to serve here are still showing up to school hungry, showing up to school sleeping in a car the night before when it's negative 10 degrees outside, showing up to school with a parent who is incarcerated, or showing up to school with a parent who was incarcerated, had a drug conviction, and now their family's food benefits are reduced.
1 minute.
Education is something that every child has a right to and should have access to. This does not have guardrails in it. It needs work before it should even be acceptable, before its actual intent can even be carried forward. It would need work. It would need those amendments to it, those changes. I continue to remain opposed to this bill. I think I'm almost out of time. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator John Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. So again, rise in support of AM 1145 and generally opposed to the underlying AM 762 and LB 364 without further amendments in addition to 1145. As I've stated before, that doesn't go enough to resolve my problems with the underlying bill. I talked about how Senator Dorn's questions made me think of other questions because it kind of made me think back and reflect on how I had interpreted certain portions of the bill. And one of them that jumped out to me was when he said that students would not necessarily remain eligible going forward. And I do recall that students would remain eligible unless they became ineligible through income threshold, when above the income threshold. But I guess it didn't even occur to me to think that they'd have to reapply and potentially be denied for other reasons besides their overall financial eligibility and other eligibility requirements. So I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. That was just my interpretation, is that if you got into a school and you, as a first time transfer into a private or parochial school from a public school, that you would qualify as long as you qualified for the other requirements, and that then you could maintain that through your subsequent years and wouldn't run the risk of losing it unless you became no longer income eligible. The reason that seems important to me is that certainty seems helpful for kids. There's also a part that jumped out at me pertaining to the tax credit is carryoverable, where someone, if they exceed their tax liability in a donation, that they can carry over for the next 5 immediately following tax years. And that raises the question to me of whether that person then takes priority in the line against anyone else in the future years, and therefore those future years could be immediately eaten up. 5 years down the road could be already used in the first year because people are saving their place in line through those donations. So that's another question that jumped out at me. I'm sure I had other ones, but those are the ones that I recalled as I was standing here preparing to talk. But then Senator Hunt, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, and a few others have kind of talked about subjects of discrimination and purposefully leaving public schools for a education that does not cover the curriculum that the public schools cover. And that actually made me think about, I'd gone and talked to Senator Groney after the fact when we talked about, he mentioned the ACT scores, and he mentioned why, the kids have a problem when they transfer. And I said that they had read that study that said kids, they equalize for non-transfer kids or kids who transfer within public schools. But one of the reasons that they thought led to lower scores on math and reading for kids when they transferred to the private schools in that study was that they were getting less instruction in math and reading because it was being replaced by something else. In a lot of cases, it is religious instruction. And so that said, what Senator Hunt said made me think about that the fact that kids are getting a different type of education when they go to a different school, a religious school. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. And that is a trade-off. You are losing the general academic time of math, reading, and other classes, and replacing it with something else, which then could account for lower performance in standardized tests, lower performance on those core curriculum subjects. So I guess that's kind of a catch-all of my comments, but I'm trying to get back to cover all the things that I've been trying to think of all day. But again, I think that we would all be well served by adopting AM 1145 and revisiting Senator Hunt's amendment requiring that folks who take this money do not discriminate. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Matt Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon again, colleagues. Again, I cannot tell you how meaningful the distinction and failure of that anti-discrimination amendment was to me and to a number of our colleagues. When we've talked about people, advocating for their communities, standing up for their communities, I'm up here talking about, people who had mental health issues, because those are people I know and I care about. Talk about people who have struggled with traditional school, because those are people I know and I care about. And the fact that we shot down an amendment that would have included just a guarantee to not discriminate on special education status or other disability. Not even necessarily as full as we probably should have written that, to include expressly that you have to have an IEP and fulfill it at the same level of public schools. And so that's like a choice I am being forced to make on this bill, and that makes it an easy choice. If schools are not going to be required to provide individualized education to accommodate students with disabilities, they should not be schools that get the benefit of state funding. We should benefit schools that are willing to. That has got to be kind of a carte blanche minimum for me. In addition to that, obviously the discrimination, some of it very kind of outwardly about people who are in the LGBT community, is problematic as well, obviously. So we're going to go from schools that both intend to and have to serve everyone to schools that are open that they don't want to serve anyone. And we're going to compare this as to being a one-to-one, or compare this and say that it is an improvement in civil rights. And I just can't buy that. I don't know how we are going to take discrimination in one fashion, support discrimination in another fashion, and call it an improvement. I just don't see that. If there's a sincere attempt to work on some of these anti-discrimination issues, that would be a huge olive branch and could move us forward. But I just know, it seems pretty clear based on the comments of Senator Hunt's amendment when it was up there, the comments since then, some of the things that groups have put on their school websites or their newsletters or what have you, that that's not going to be what they want. That's not probably going to be something they're going to compromise on. I wouldn't necessarily expect them to compromise on that if that's truly a core value of theirs, but that's also why they don't get public funds. That's also why, we have this system. And finally, and I can't believe I haven't made this point or it hasn't come up before, when we talk about tax credits and the amount of tax credits people have supported, we always talk about tax credits generally to incentivize private actors in a market situation. It's our way of stimulating some portion of the economy or using some sort of economic incentives to stimulate the economy. I cannot think of another tax credit in which the thing we are stimulating is already a service the government provides for free to everyone and anyone. I cannot think, maybe there's one, I'm sure somebody's got a list, but when we talk about encouraging competition, not like encouraging competition with other states, we're not talking about encouraging competitions in like emerging job categories or new market sectors. We're talking about encouraging competition with public institutions that are open for everyone. This would be like the akin to giving out money to private libraries to compete with the regular libraries. Like, why would we think that's a good incentive when we've already, as a society, codified in our Constitution the right for it to be free to the student? Why would we want to then challenge that and push that forward? And that's why, for so many other reasons, this bill is so different. We're going to have to work and make sure that if any of this program moves forward, it's not in a discriminatory manner at a minimum, in addition to all the other issues that we haven't even had a chance to scratch in this debate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Morfeld.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I want to talk a little bit more about my amendment because we got sidetracked with some other issues that came up. So my amendment is going to make it so that these private institutions that receive the benefit of this would be able to then, not be able to, they'd be required to follow all of the budgetary requirements that a public school is required to report and be accessible and accountable to the public and transparent. And I just want to note a few other things. I mean, I think Senator Hansen's comments just a little bit earlier really rings true in the sense that when I talk to teachers, one of the number one issues why teachers are leaving the profession is, one, because of they are being overworked in many cases. Two, they're not being compensated for that work, particularly when they're very talented, motivated individuals that can be making a lot more money in the private sector, which is generally the case if you're working in the government sector. But in particular, teacher pay is incredibly low unless you've been doing it for 20 or 30 years. And even if you've been doing it for 20 or 30 years, quite frankly, you could be making a lot more than what you're doing right then. So if we're going to be investing resources or diverting resources, which is essentially what we're doing here from public education, then I personally think that we should be investing $5 million in increasing teachers' salaries across the state. Now, there's a lot of teachers out there, so $5 million would probably be a drop in the bucket, but I think that that would be a much more productive and prudent course of action in terms of increasing the quality of education. Because as many of us know, there's some teachers that start out first year, they know what they're doing, they're great teachers. But as we also know, people gain experience and they become better. They gain more training, they become better teachers, more seasoned teachers. And this would help us with recruitment, retention, and attraction. So just bouncing off a little bit of what Senator Matt Hansen said, I think that we should be, quite frankly, investing more of our time and resources and money into our current public education system as we have it now. And if there are targeted interventions that we need to have, either writ large across the state or in certain areas of the state, then I'm open to additional legislation to be able to provide those targeted interventions, those resources and funding and that programming as well. But getting back to the requirements, so under my amendment, what we would be doing is requiring that the private schools follow all the budgetary requirements as the public schools. So I'm just looking at the Department of Education guidelines for the budgetary process for public schools. It's a fairly long document, but it has more than just the budget hearing and things like that. But by September 20, adopted budgets for school districts must be filed with the Auditor of Public Accounts, the county clerk, and the Nebraska Department of Education. So these schools receiving these benefits would then be required to do that under my legislation. In addition, there needs to be a budget hearing. School districts must hold a public hearing prior to adopting the budget. I'm reading from this document here. The notice of budget hearing and budget summary must be published in a newspaper of general circulation in the school district 4 days prior to the hearing. The Auditor of Public Accounts considers the day of publication, but not the day of the hearing as part of the 4-day count. For example, the hearing notice must appear in the paper on Thursday to legally hold a hearing on the following Monday. Notes to consult legal counsel to provide a timeline for the publication of the hearing notice. The notice of budget hearing and budget summary must include the time, date, and place of the hearing, a summary of the proposed budget statement, and an itemized estimate of the property tax request. And in this case, that wouldn't be relevant because they wouldn't be levying property taxes.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. The notice of the budget hearing for the budget summary form is provided by the Auditor of Public Accounts and meets all the statutory requirements for publishing. So there's actually already a form in which they would be able to provide this information. So that's convenient for the schools that would be receiving this financial benefit. A school district may hold a budget hearing prior to a regular board meeting or may schedule a hearing at another convenient time. It's important to note that we did pass LB 528 in 2021. And I don't know if that was either, that might have been a Senator Ben Hansen bill or Senator Groney bill, I can't remember, but a link to the Department of Education's Nebraska Education Profile website to provide their patrons information related to statewide receipts, expenditures, and to compare the cost per pupil and performance with other schools. I think that's actually pretty important for the private schools to do this because as we're talking about comparing ACT scores and things like that, I think it would be important data for us to have given that some of these benefits would be going to these private schools. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Marfold. Senator Merman.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. As a member of the Education Committee, I thought I'd better take the opportunity to speak on this subject again. I support, public schools all the way. I think they, in general, in the state, do a great job. We have good public schools. I attended public schools. My children attended public schools, and we're very happy with the education they got. I know disability has been spoken about quite a bit in this discussion. From our own experience, we do have a profoundly disabled child, and she went through all the way through public schools, and we're very happy with the services she got in the public school. having a disabled child, we have the opportunity to get lessons and camaraderie and ideas from other families with disabled children. And we did know some that their disabled child did attend a private school, and those parents were very happy with the services and the education they got in the private school, quite often in cooperation with a public school. So I do think private schools can serve disabled students very well, and I've seen that from experience. And I should say that, and it's been spoken about before, that public schools do get funding from both federal and state government to serve disabled students, and I think that's great that that happens. But, private schools, have a bigger burden to serve a disabled student, without as much funding. So, and I think from my experience, they do a good job at that. I do think the most important thing that I think was brought up early in this discussion by Senator Geist yesterday is anything we can do as a legislature to encourage students and families to educate their children in the way they see fit is what we should be doing. We saw that this summer in the State Board of Education hearings, and I think that's a great thing that came out of those hearings, is that parents are very concerned about the education of their children, and that's the way it should be. And one thing I wanted to bring up, private schools do have to live up to or do have to comply with many of the same rules and regulations that we have on our public schools in the state of Nebraska. In Nebraska, all schools are, whether they're private or public, must be either approved or accredited, unless they are I don't know exactly what the term for it is, a
1 minute.
non-accredited, I think, homeschool, but that may not be quite the right term. But all schools, whether private or public, have to do that. The Nebraska Department of Education does highly regulate non-public schools in Nebraska. Nebraska has one of the most highly regulated private schools in the country. And I believe 75%, trying to find the exact figure, 75% of the private schools in this country, in the state of Nebraska, are accredited, and the other 25% are not, because they are usually small schools with very limited resources that can't have everything it takes to be a accredited school, but they also serve their students very well. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Merman. Senator Pauls.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now I'm speaking to the general public. Whatever we save for the good part of the day and until we finish with this bill, decisions have been made. So what we're doing, we're actually, to be honest with you, filling in time. Just so you understand that. I think what we're doing here today, we found out we have good schools in the public sector and in the private sector. No argument. We have schools in probably both sectors who do need help. Probably not an issue with that. But I think this is larger, this issue is larger than sending kids to one school or to another school. If you look at the map, most of the schools that need improvement come from a certain section of the state of Nebraska. That's the southeastern part of Omaha. These are schools who are in poverty. The thing is poverty. It's not the school necessarily. It's what children bring to the school, their life. I dare say the majority of those teachers in those schools are working their tails off. They're sincere about that. So it's not the teachers. It's the element they're coming from. If you don't have money, if you're barely surviving, life is tough. So again, that's why I am going to harass Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney. You have, as I've been told now, 40 projects in North Omaha that we should be taking a look with the federal dollars that are coming into this state. We need to concentrate on that. Do we need to improve North Omaha, or do we need a 4,000-acre lake? It's that simple. You know, I hear people say, we need to look at the kids. We need to look at people. Well, doggone it, guys, I'm counting on you to come and to force me to support you and the rest of us to support, because that's where the issue is. The kids come to school because they have issues from how they live. Now, a plug for something I have coming up. You've heard me talk about the schools that need improvement. In the state of Nebraska, there are 116. Close to 40 of them come, and I'm using these round numbers, come from certain parts of Omaha. We know what they need help in. The State Department gets to pick 3 schools a year to focus on. We need to do more than that. We need to select a number of schools, have somebody oversee what is needed, follow through, because right now I have the documents from Druid Hill in Omaha. You can take a look at what they have done for several years. Parent help, teacher help, scores, test scores. It's here. But we need some additional help to make sure we follow through and we can do it. The action, to be honest with you, I think some of the school districts should be doing it themselves, but it may be too big of an issue for them. But I've already taken a look at the maps, and we have sections of the state that we can correlate to 4 or 5 different schools in different towns and have somebody helping them, actually probably indirectly through the ESU. We have it. It's not, we have to find the information.
1 minute.
Thank you. We have to be able to utilize it. And I'm telling them, there are a number of people in these small towns who need help. I taught in a small town. I know the differences because they didn't have all that support help. You just need that. I am, and I'm going to switch gears now. I am a product of St. John's of Beloit, Catholic school for a number of years. And then my parents moved to another town. And then I was a product of public schools. So guess what? I understand both of them because I've lived it. My first teaching job in Kansas, I was in a school district where one of the Catholic schools became part of the public school system. My first principal was a nun in a public schools.
Thanks, Senator Pauls. Senator Flood.
Thank you, Mr. President, members. Well, we've turned school funding for private schools into the motorcycle helmet repeal bill. This feels like World War I. We've got all these people on one side that say we want this in our school, and then we have people that are opponents that sit on the other side and they don't want it, and nobody goes and talks to each other and say, you know what, maybe if we worked with the people, the 29, the 30, the 31 votes that want this, maybe we could get some of the things that we want for education. But I guarantee when we take the cloture vote and we're short of 33 votes, the die will be cast for the whole session. And everybody, the 2/3 of the majority that run around and try and get this thing passed, they'll have the clear message that these private schools are undervalued by the rest of everybody. And then they'll make sure, I'm sure, that all of the different things that good, well-intentioned members of the Education Committee want, that those won't pass either. When I was here 10 years ago, we didn't have a motorcycle helmet repeal bill every day. But in this legislature, this is something that apparently is the way it works. It's what I've come to find on my return to this place. What trench are you in? Are you ever going to get out of the trench and walk over to the other side and say, you know what? What could we do for private schools to make this work? Can you help us then with teacher recruitment for public schools? What can we do to figure out a better funding formula? But instead, we're at war, and neither side is to blame. Everyone's to blame. I would like to be part of a coalition of senators that said, we'll get this across the finish line. We will put away all the fears and all of the reasons that we have to be mad at the other side, and let's figure out a way to make this work. Senator Walz, you could assemble a group of people on your side to come over and say, how do we get from where we're at to where we want to go? And if it involves private schools, can we do this and this and this? That's what Senator Linehan was asking for this morning. But you've all been doing this much longer than I have. Some of you, this is your 7th or 8th year. This is what you do. You go in there and you vote no. This is the way I've done it every single year. And guess who loses? The young lady in Omaha that's raising 2 kids, trying to get her through a private school because that's the niche. She loses. You win. You get in your trench. You win. You stop it. You got the cloture. Go home and celebrate. Go home and make sure that you did it to private schools again. That's fine. That's the way it works down here. Tomorrow I'll get in my trench and I'll do something back to you. Perfect. We should all feel real good about ourselves, I think, because at the end of the day, 2/3 of the majority of this place is saying, let's get something done. But I guarantee I know how the vote will come out, and I guarantee that's gonna foreshadow the rest of the session. We can all be happy with ourselves that we voted our way. You can go back to the K-12 folks and say, we held the line, and we can go back to the folks that are supporting LB 364, and we'll say, we'll try again next year. But are any votes going to change? Senator McKinney changed his mind. I changed my mind when I started this year. I changed my mind when Senator Hunt made a compelling argument last year on the DNA bill from Senator Hilkeman. I can change my mind. I'm willing to vote for something that brings both sides together. I'm willing to vote to do good things because I want to do good things for public schools. But here we sit in our trench waiting for the vote to be taken, to put our time in, like we're at the old rock pile, just taking care of business. My side especially likes votes to get to about 31, 29, somewhere in there. It's our sweet spot. That 33 is elusive, but it shouldn't be. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Flood. Senator Michaela Cavan, I recognize your 3rd opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I'm not going to go home happy that I participated in this bill not moving forward. It brings me no joy to take something that another colleague has worked so hard on and work to stop it. I'm not happy about that at all. And I know how much this means to Senator Linehan. And so it's not something that I am relishing even a little bit. And if I seem like I'm bringing any levity to my remarks, it's only because sometimes that's the way you have to do it to get through. But I don't relish going against anyone's priority. I stand where I stand, and others will stand where they stand on other bills, and I won't be able to stop them. And I have had lots of things that are really important to me that have gotten 32 votes or 31 or even 25 for that matter, which really is all you need. But you have to have good policy and you have to bring people along. And sometimes that's just not going to happen. But we've heard a lot today and yesterday about race and equity and the need to address the enormous disparities for Black and Brown Nebraskans. And I hope that people were genuine in those remarks that they made, because we do have opportunities to do something this year. We have significant opportunities to do something this year. And yes, it is not to build a lake for recreation. It is absolutely to work with Senators McKinney and Wayne and Senator Vargas and Aguilar and Sanders to address disparities in their communities. We have so much money that we can do so much good with. And I'm not here to pick a fight with anyone. I'm not here to try and hurt any of my colleagues. I would love to work with all of you. I have a great deal of respect for Senator Linehan. Usually, in spite of me, she gets what she wants done. And if I am in a trench, I've been in that trench since the day I started. I don't support tax incentives. I don't support putting state dollars towards people who can discriminate. I've stood firm on that. I will continue to stand firm on that. And if anyone wants to join me in that, they can agree to vote for Senator Hunt's motion, or not motion, her amendment that would have protected children with all different identities and backgrounds. So I guess I am entrenched in non-discrimination. That is my line. It is a hard and fast line. And it doesn't matter who the introducer is, I'm not going to cross that line, ever. How much time? 1 minute? Okay, thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I look forward to this session moving forward, and hopefully we can come together on some really important, significant pieces of legislation, because we have that opportunity this year. And I get it, it's one-time money, but one-time money can infuse a new life into communities. And so I just want to be here to work together with everyone to make that happen. I yield the remainder of my time to the chair.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator John Kavanaugh, your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Well, as everyone's commenting, we're getting up at the end here. I thought I would yield my time to Senator Linehan if she had anything she wanted to say, since she's not up in the queue, if you wanted to take.
Thank you.
Senator Linehan, 4 minutes, 45.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. So I think we're about to the deadline here. Thank you, Senator Flood. I hope some of us take to heart what you said. It's good. I want to thank Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney for their help on this. It's critical. I want to thank Senator Brewer, who shouldn't even be here because he should be home taking care of himself. Senator Boswell, who came in. I want to thank you all. I want to thank the Revenue Committee. I know that people have issues with this bill and are heartfelt. This is what I will promise you. If we could somehow get to 33, I won't bring a bill back for select unless I have 33. So let me repeat that. If we can get to 33 right now, I promise you, I will not bring it back. I will not ask the speaker to bring it back unless I have a commitment and I have satisfied at least 33 people in this body that they can support the bill. And maybe if we do that, we can avoid some of what Senator Flood is talking about. And I will work in good faith. I will yield the rest of my time to my partner in all of this, Senator Wayne.
You may not yield, Senator.
I can't?
You're on,
I'll ask Senator Wayne a question. Senator Wayne, would you yield to a question?
Senator Wayne, yield, please.
Yes.
Senator Wayne, how do you feel right now?
I feel good. I just think at this time we take the vote, and I appreciate what Senator Flood said. But I do want to remind everybody, I'm fine with whatever we decide to do, but that has to apply consistently. Right now, we have a lot of people in juvenile who are under the state's custody at Boys Town. They are a religious organization. We have a lot of people being served at DD services that are served by religious organizations. There will be bills on the floor. If that's your hard line, do it to your own bill. We got to be consistent. And that's what this vote is going to be about, being consistent. I want us to be honest with each other. I don't have any problem with anybody, but I want us to be consistent. I want us to think about, when we're taking this vote, about the individual kids who maybe aren't special need, who are maybe highly educated or have high IQs, who are maybe just a regular kid who cannot fit into the school that they're at and their parent is looking for an option. I'm not here to deal with systems. I'm here to make individual lives better. And while it is true we have to fix the whole thing, Senator Pauls, I agree with you. This is a start. And if we get to 33, we can eventually vote on Senator Moorfield's bill. We can eventually amend it. Then we can eventually get to my amendment that limits this to a pilot program, a true pilot program, that it disappears unless somebody brings a bill and justifies back to this body of why it should continue. We do it all the time. We do pilot programs all the time. I hope we have the courage to stand up to the lobby. I hope we have the courage to listen to those individuals who came in and testified about why they need this option. And while we continue to work to build public education and make it stronger, there are many families across this country, including my district, that can't wait 50 years. And no change will happen overnight, but allowing somebody to have a scholarship can instantaneously change their educational outcome tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Matt Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, probably one last time, colleagues. Colleagues, I appreciate all the sentiments, and I appreciate that I might be getting the closing word here. I would love to find a solution to move things forward. That's not off the table. I'm not anti-compromise. I'm in a position where I perpetually have to play defense in this body, and I have to play defense on pretty much every issue from every angle and every avenue. And at the end of the day, I have to represent my constituents in Lincoln, and I view there be repeated attempts and threats at Lincoln Public Schools. We've seen some bills introduced, we've seen some press conferences already that I think are going to harm educational outcomes in Lincoln Public Schools. I am not willing to additionally upon that throw any amount of money to additional outside, unregulated, whatever we want to call them, private ed schools. I've had people try and explain how they work, what they do, the great outcomes. I'm glad they exist. I'm glad people choose them. I'm glad people have that opportunity. I do not trust this body to actually make public schools better. And if we start this branch where we start diverting state funds to private schools, that is only going to grow over time and over time and over time. And in addition, we are going to continue to limit the budgeting authority, the property tax levies, all sorts of different things from the state level to our public schools. These are two different trains moving in two different directions, and that is the fundamental issue I have here. If we're talking about grand things we're going to come, if we're talking about new bills or bills that are going to appear in the future, a sunset, anti-discrimination clause, protections on students with special needs, individual education plans, all of these things are things we're going to have to want to talk about and want to justify to even get me to start appropriating it. In addition to having probably this tied to all of the property tax and TIOSA debate we're going to have this session. Because I can't voluntarily start diverting state funds in a direction to private schools when I know there are going to be repeated attempts to limit the expenditures, limit the levies, do all sorts of things against public schools without the regard to educational outcomes. And that's my perpetual frustration with this. I have several of them apparently, but that's a perpetual frustration with this. On this particular bill, we're all about outcomes. We're all about lifting students. When we talk about other things related to property tax, related to K through 12, we're all about costs and keeping costs down and these runaway administrators and these runaway school boards and all of these things. Colleagues, I can't look at a potentially inevitable and growing group of money for private schools who are not going to be held to the same standards on anti-discrimination, on individual education, potentially just on academic standards. We talked about how some private schools are all over the map on a variety of different things. And at the same time, I know we are going to hold up Lincoln Public Schools, talk about excesses or waste of taxpayer dollars, and cut and cut and cut from this body at them. I have to hold both of those items in my mind at the same time when I am making these decisions. I cannot start justifying diverting funds to this program when I know we're going to spend the last, 54 days, 55 days of my tenure defending public schools from repeated cuts and limits. And that is the ultimate crux of where I'm at. So with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on the desk?
Mr. President, pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10, Senator Linehan would move to invoke cloture on LB 364.
It's ruling of the chair that there has been a full and fair debate afforded to LB 364. Senator Linehan, for what purpose do you rise?
Call the House and a roll call vote in regular order, please.
It's been a request to place House under call. The question is, shall the House go into call? All those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Record, please.
31 ayes, 1 nay to place House under call.
House under call. All members, please return to your chamber. Check in. The House is under call. All members, please return and check in. The House is under call. Senators Wishart and Slama, please return to the chamber and check in. All members are present. The first vote is whether or not to invoke cloture. Roll call vote has been requested. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar. Voting yes. Senator Albright. Voting yes. Senator Arch. Voting yes. Senator Blood. Voting no. Senator Bostar. Voting no. Senator Bostelman. Voting yes. Senator Brandt. Not voting. Senator Brewer. Voting yes. Senator Breezy. Voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting no. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting no. Senator Clements. Voting yes. Senator Day. Voting no. Senator DeBoer. Voting no. Senator Dorn. Voting yes. Senator Erdman. Voting yes. Senator Flood. Voting yes. Senator Friesen. Not voting. Senator Geist. Voting yes. Senator Gregert. Voting yes. Senator Groney. Voting yes. Senator Halloran. Voting yes. Senator Ben Hansen. Voting yes. Senator Matt Hansen. Voting no. Senator Hilgers. Voting yes. Senator Hilkeman. Voting no. Senator Hughes. Voting yes. Senator Hunt. Voting no. Senator Coulterman. Voting yes. Senator Lathrop. Voting no. Senator Lindstrom. Voting yes. Senator Linehan. Voting yes. Senator Lowe. Voting yes. Senator McAllister. Voting no. Senator McDonald. Voting yes. Senator McKinney. Voting yes. Senator Morfeld. Voting no. Senator Mosier. Voting yes. Senator Merman. Voting yes. Senator Pauls. Not voting. Senator Pansing Brooks. Not voting. Senator Sanders. Voting yes. Senator Slama. Voting yes. Senator Stinner. Not voting. Senator Vargas. Not voting. Senator Walls. Not voting. Senator Wayne. Voting yes. Senator Williams. Voting no. Senator Wishart. Voting no. Vote is 28 ayes, 14 nays to invoke cloture.
The motion is not successful. I raise the call. If you have items, Mr. Clerk.
I do, Mr. President. Legislative bill, new bills, first of all, Mr. President. Legislative Bill 1009, introduced by Senator Brandt. It's a bill for an act relating to domestic abuse, adopts the Domestic Abuse Death Review Act. Legislative Bill 1010, introduced by Senator Geist, is a bill for an act relating to the Nebraska Juvenile Code, amends several sections, provides for the release of certain probation information, electronic monitoring data to law enforcement, harmonized provisions, and repeals the original section. Additional items, Mr. President, amendments to be printed. Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Matt Hansen to LB 364, as well as two amendments from Senator Hilkeman to LB 496 and 496A. Name add, Senator Williams added to LB 773 and Senator Holleran to 774. Finally, Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Williams moved to adjourn the body until 9:45 tomorrow, 9:45, January 13th, 2022.
Members, you heard the motion to adjourn until 9:45 tomorrow morning. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. We are adjourned until 9:45 tomorrow morning.